Have you ever noticed how someone's energy completely shifts the moment they realize they've lost you? How a person you once chased starts to chase nothing at all because now the power has quietly slipped from their hands into yours. There's a subtle psychology behind every glance, every text, every sudden act of trying, and it's not what most men expect. Today, we're diving into the behaviors women unconsciously display when they know the game has changed, when they understand the moment they could have had is gone forever. This isn't about manipulation, it's about understanding human emotions, about seeing the truth in how loss reshapes dynamics and how you can recognize it without needing to be told directly. When a woman realizes she has lost you, the first thing you will notice is the sudden shift in her energy, a subtle transformation that is almost imperceptible to the untrained eye, but impossible to ignore once you pay attention because it carries a weight that words alone cannot convey. She may no longer approach interactions with the same intensity, the same confidence, or the same sense of ownership she once held. And instead, there is a careful restraint in how she moves through the space around you, as if she is measuring her presence, testing how much she is allowed to exist without, disrupting the new balance you have created. And in that measurement there is a quiet acknowledgement that the control she once felt slipping through her fingers has finally left her hands. You may notice in the way she speaks, the tone of her voice that once carried warmth, dominance, or certainty now becomes softer, almost neutral, as though she is treading lightly on unfamiliar ground, unsure of how to navigate the dynamic that has shifted without her realizing it until it was too late. Her gestures, once spontaneous or confident, may now feel calculated, as if each movement and is a silent experiment to gauge your reaction, to see if there is still a part of you that can be swayed, pulled back, or unsettled by her presence. And in this restrained behavior, there is an unconscious recognition that the energy she once commanded effortlessly is no longer hers to wield. The sudden change in energy also manifests in her attention, which may fluctuate unpredictably. There are moments when she seems engaged, laughing, or interacting with ease, followed by periods of silence or distance that feel jarring because they contradict the connection she previously maintained. And this inconsistency is not random. It is a reflection of the inner tension between her pride and the emerging awareness of loss. The subtle battle between wanting to regain control and the reality that you are no longer dependent on her presence. And in observing this shift, it becomes clear that the dynamic has reversed, that the space she once filled with certainty and dominance is now occupied by your calm, detachment. Even her emotional expressions take on a different texture, softer, more tentative, almost fragile, in comparison to the forceful or passionate energy she displayed before. Smiles may appear less frequent, gestures less assertive, and moments of interaction carry an undercurrent of hesitation, a quiet acknowledgement that the energy she once projected effortlessly is no longer creating the impact she intended. And in these nuances, you can sense the internal recalibration occurring, the subtle realization that she is navigating unfamiliar territory, trying to reconcile the gap between the person she was when she had you and the person she has become. In the moment, she understands the loss. This shift is not always dramatic. It is not always overt, but it is deeply perceptible to anyone who observes energy rather than words, because energy reveals truth in ways that are there. Conversation cannot. And when you witness it, when you recognize the careful restraint, the tentative gestures, the inconsistent engagement, and the softened emotional expression, you understand that the sudden shift in energy is the quiet admission of a reality she cannot yet articulate. When a woman realizes she has lost you, one of the most telling behaviors she exhibits is the subtle, almost imperceptible testing of your reactions. A pattern that is deeply psychological and rooted in the awareness that the dynamic between you has fundamentally shifted. And even if she does not consciously understand why she feels compelled to do it, every word, gesture, or seemingly casual action carries the weight of curiosity and longing, a need to measure whether any trace of attachment still exists within you. And in this testing, she is both exploring your boundaries and revealing her own internal struggle with the reality of your absence. These tests rarely come in obvious forms. They are rarely direct questions or overt attempts to manipulate, but rather small, seemingly innocent probes. Messages sent at unexpected hours, comments dropped casually about shared memories, fleeting glimpses into moments that once held significance between you, or subtle compliments that feel out of place. Each one designed to observe your response to, see whether you react with eagerness, irritation, indifference, or warmth. Because the answer to these micro reactions informs her understanding of the power she has lost and whether there remains any influence she can reclaim in a situation that now favors your detachment. The testing is often cyclical, appearing in waves of engagement followed by silence, like a quiet experiment where she observes, analyzes, and adapts based on the outcomes of her attempts. She might reach out with a casual text that seems innocent but carries an undertone of hope. And when the reply is measured or indifferent, she withdraws, recalibrates, and tries again in a different form, whether through humor, nostalgia, or subtle flirtation. And ever, interaction becomes a mirror for her to gauge what has shifted, to examine the emotional terrain that she once navigated with certainty, now fraught with unknowns and the silent reality that she no longer dictates the terms of connection. This behavior is often accompanied by an undercurrent of tension between pride and vulnerability, a dance of ego and desire that plays out in ways that can feel contradictory. She might act casual one moment as if unconcerned, only to drop hints of longing the next, sending signals that are both invitations and tests, each designed to measure the depth of your emotional state without revealing the internal turmoil she is experiencing. And in observing these reactions, she is seeking reassurance, validation, or even the faintest sign that she still matters, while simultaneously protecting herself from the sting of rejection and the undeniable truth that the dynamic has shifted irreversibly. Her testing is subtle but revealing, a silent language of gestures, messages, and emotional cues that communicate what she cannot admit openly. The awareness that she has lost you, that the certainty she once held over your attention is gone, and that the balance of power has quietly, irrevocably shifted. And in the way she watches, the way she engages, and the way she withdraws, you can trace the contours of her attempt to understand what she has let slip away. The quiet acknowledgement that the reactions she receives now are more valuable to her than any words could ever convey. One of the most profound behaviors a woman exhibits when she knows she has lost you is the way she uses absence to communicate. A silence that speaks louder than any words. A void that draws attention to the value of what she no longer possesses. And it is in this absence that the subtle psychology of loss reveals itself in ways that are both undeniable and deeply human, because humans naturally respond to what they cannot have. And in that response lies the quiet power of detachment that you now hold without even trying. The attention she once demanded so freely, the constant messages, the calls, the presence that seemed inseparable from her energy now diminishes, fades, or disappears entirely, creating a space that feels strange, almost uncomfortable, at first because it was once filled with predictability, with assurance, with the constant hum of emotional connection. And in this emptiness, there is a subtle invitation for reflection, for recognition of the gap she has left behind, and for the awareness of what you have gained in her withdrawal. This absence is never random. It is never without meaning. Each moment she refrains from reaching out. Each interaction she avoids or delays carries the invisible weight of a test, a way to gauge whether her lack of attention now creates desire, curiosity, or even anxiety within you. Because in the world of human connection, absence is a force, a magnetic pull that highlights the things that were once taken for granted. And when she steps back, whether consciously or unconsciously, she is signaling that the power dynamic has shifted, that the emotional leverage she once held is no longer available, and that in her silence, you are now free to exist without expectation, without pressure, and without the subtle strings she once controlled. The psychological impact of this absence is nuanced, where once her presence might have triggered dependency, distraction, or urgency in your actions, now the absence forces introspection on her part, reflection on what was lost, and recognition of your autonomy. And it is in these unspoken pauses that the truth of your value becomes clear, because absence exposes what presence can sometimes conceal. She may attempt to fill the silence, occasionally with small gestures, fleeting messages, or indirect engagement, each one highlighting her awareness that she has stepped back into unfamiliar territory, that the absence she now maintains is both a reminder and a revelation of the impact of losing you. And in watching this subtle dance, it becomes evident that her energy is no longer about possession, but about witnessing the consequences of her choices. This strategy of attention through absence is paradoxical. It draws focus precisely because she is not there, because she is no longer the constant force in your life that shaped your attention and dictated your emotional responses. And in the rare glimpses of her reaching out, of curiosity peeking through, you see the tension between pride and longing, between detachment and desire. And in this tension, you understand that absence has become the most honest reflection of loss, because nothing signals the end of certainty more clearly than the silence that replaces the noise. And in the space she leaves, the truth of your independence, your growth, and your power is revealed when a woman realizes she has lost you. One of the most revealing behaviors she exhibits is a sudden peak in emotional transparency, a shift that uncovers vulnerability she rarely displays, because the awareness of loss strips away the defenses she once relied on, leaving her exposed in ways that are both subtle and undeniable. And it is in these moments that you begin to see the raw, unfiltered side of her emotions. A side that was previously guarded, hidden behind layers of confidence, pride, and carefully curated composure. This transparency is not always intentional. She does not necessarily plan to show the depth of her feelings. Yet in moments of reflection, memory, or unexpected interaction, her emotions seep through, visible in the tone of her voice, the hesitancy of her words, or the weight of pauses between sentences. And each fragment of emotional honesty is a silent acknowledgement that the reality she faces is one she cannot control, that the connection she once relied on is now outside her grasp. And that her emotional defenses, once so automatic, are no longer sufficient to contain the awareness of what she has lost. These peaks of emotional transparency can manifest in numerous ways, sometimes through nostalgic references, sudden confessions, or subtle attempts to reconnect through memory. And in these moments, you witness a vulnerability that is both poignant and instructive, because it is rarely accompanied by direct requests for reconciliation. Instead, it is a quiet admission of regret, a gentle unveiling of longing, and a reflection of internal conflict, where pride battles desire and where The ego that once masked insecurity now falters under the pressure of undeniable awareness. She may share stories of the past, reminisce about moments that once felt trivial, or reveal emotions she never voiced when you were together. And each glimpse is a reminder that loss has a way of dissolving barriers, revealing truths that were always present but never expressed. And in observing this, you recognize the paradoxical strength in her vulnerability, because it takes courage to confront what was lost without demanding its return. And it is this courage that shapes the subtle intensity of her newfound transparency. Her emotional peaks are often accompanied by a sense of hesitation and unpredictability, a delicate balancing act between pride and the natural pull of desire, where she oscillates between guardedness and openness, between silence and sharing, creating moments of intense clarity that feel almost accidental but are deeply significant, because in these moments you see her processing the reality of loss in real time, her emotional honesty, offering a window into her psyche that is both intimate and revealing. She may apologize without prompting, express regret without expectation, or reveal insecurities that were previously masked by confidence and control. And in doing so, she unintentionally conveys the depth of attachment she once felt, the recognition of your value, and the undeniable impact your absence has had on her internal world. These peaks of emotional transparency are never constant. They ebb and flow like tides, sometimes appearing briefly, sometimes lingering longer than anticipated. And in each instance, they serve as a mirror, reflecting both her awareness of what she has lost and the subtle influence your presence or absence continues to have on her, highlighting the intricate interplay between vulnerability, desire, and self-awareness. And in witnessing this, you begin to understand the profound effect that loss has on human behavior, the way it exposes truths previously concealed, and the quiet power inherent in the moments when emotional transparency becomes unavoidable. One of the most noticeable behaviors a woman exhibits when she realizes she has lost you is inconsistent communication, a fluctuation that is both confusing and revealing, because it mirrors the internal conflict she is experiencing, the tension between pride, regret, and the subtle desire to reconnect. And it becomes a window into her shifting emotional landscape, where the certainty she once held over your attention has been replaced by uncertainty, hesitation, and a quiet awareness that the balance of power has changed in ways she did not anticipate. Inconsistent communication often appears as cycles of engagement and withdrawal, moments when she reaches out with warmth, humor, or curiosity, followed by periods of silence, coldness, or avoidance. And it is within these oscillations that the truth of her awareness begins to surface, because every instance of engagement is a test, every period of distance a reflection of her struggle to reconcile her desire with the reality of her loss. And in observing these patterns, you start to notice the subtle psychology at play, the way her words, messages, and gestures carry a weight far greater than their apparent simplicity. The unpredictability of her communication can leave you feeling uncertain even when you're aware of the dynamics, because her attention no longer follows a predictable rhythm. It is no longer automatic, no longer guaranteed. And this unpredictability is intentional, even if unconsciously so, because it is rooted in the need to measure your responses, to gauge whether any attachment remains, and to explore whether the emotional influence she once held still exists in the moments she is absent. One day she may text casually, laugh at something trivial, or reminisce about shared experiences. And the next, Days she may vanish without explanation, ignore messages, or respond coldly. And this fluctuation is a reflection of her internal battle between ego and longing, between the pride that tells her not to show weakness and the vulnerability that forces her to confront the reality of loss, creating a complex and sometimes contradictory pattern that is unmistakably human and deeply revealing. This inconsistency also reveals a subtle awareness of your independence, because in the absence of constant contact, she is forced to observe how you respond to gaps in attention, whether you chase, react emotionally, or remain composed. And in this observation, she unconsciously measures the strength of the connection she once held and the power she no longer possesses. The variation in communication becomes a mirror of her internal state. A reflection of longing, regret, and the quiet tension between wanting what is unattainable and protecting herself from the sting of rejection. And in this mirror, you see the complex interplay of pride, desire, and awareness that defines her behavior when she recognizes that the dynamics have shifted irreversibly. Inconsistent communication is not random. It is deliberate in its subtlety, patterned in ways that reveal more than any words could, because the fluctuation itself carries meaning, signaling where her thoughts wander, where attachment lingers, and where acknowledgement of loss quietly asserts itself. And in noticing this inconsistency, you gain insight into the profound effect of loss on human behavior, the delicate tension between presence and absence, desire and restraint, pride and vulnerability, and the way that the ebb and flow of communication can silently reveal truths that words alone cannot capture. When a woman realizes she has lost you, nothing captivates her more profoundly than the magnetism of your self-sufficiency, the quiet power that comes from your ability to exist fully without needing her validation, attention, or presence. Because in her awareness of loss, it is about thriving despite absence, about creating a life that is rich, fulfilling, and aligned with your values without external validation. And it is in seeing this that she feels the weight of what she lost, the intangible yet undeniable allure of a man who is whole, confident, and at peace with himself. She notices how you navigate life with clarity, how your priorities remain unwavering, and how your interactions carry intentionality rather than dependence. And in witnessing this, she experiences the quiet magnetism of respect, admiration, and sometimes longing, because she realizes that what she took for granted was never about possession, but about presence, consistency, and the energy that she now sees radiating without effort. Her recognition of your self-sufficiency is often accompanied by subtle internal conflict, a mix of regret, admiration, and the unspoken acknowledgement that she underestimated the depth of your independence. And it is in this tension that the power of attraction shifts completely, because energy that is complete in itself naturally draws attention, interest, and subconscious desire without the need for overt effort, manipulation, or pursuit. And she begins to understand, perhaps without even articulating it, that the very quality that made her attempt to reclaim influence is now the same quality that makes you untouchable, magnetic and undeniably valuable. A presence that cannot be dictated or controlled, a force that exists on its own terms. Understanding how a woman behaves when she knows she has lost you is not about ego, control, or proving a point. It is about recognizing the subtle shifts in energy, the quiet tests, the absence that speaks louder than words, the rare moments of emotional transparency, the inconsistency in communication, and the undeniable magnetism of self-sufficiency that you embody. Because in observing these behaviors, you begin to see the psychology of human connection with clarity, the way loss reshapes desire, and the way true value is often realized only in hindsight. And the lesson is clear. when you hold your own presence, when you remain grounded in your self-worth, when you move through life with independence and calm, the dynamics of attraction, respect, and admiration shift in ways that are profound and irreversible. And in that understanding, you step into a space of power that is quiet, confident, and deeply magnetic. It becomes apparent that her actions are a reflection of awareness, of realization, and of the subtle acknowledgement that the person she once underestimated is no longer available to be swayed. And in witnessing this, you learn the greatest truth of all, that your value is never dependent on someone else's attention. That loss has a language of its own, and that energy, presence, and self-sufficiency are forces that speak louder than pursuit, manipulation, or insistence. Because when you embody completeness, the world and the people in it cannot help but notice, cannot help but respond, and cannot help but recognize what has been lost. And it is in holding this space for yourself that true respect, admiration, and authentic attraction naturally emerge. Ultimately, the way a woman treats you when she knows she has lost you is a mirror reflecting your own power, your own growth. And the quiet strength of someone who understands that value cannot be given, taken, or borrowed. It can only be owned, lived, and projected. The rough presence, confidence, and unwavering self-respect. And in embracing this truth, you move forward, not with resentment, not with longing, but with a clear understanding of human dynamics, emotional intelligence, and the magnetic energy that comes from being complete in self,